Hello, and thank you for listening to Texas History for Kids. I'm your host, Michelle Gallegos, an educator, writer, history nerd, and novice investigator. Each week on the show, we will learn about interesting parts of Texas history, from battles and historical figures to the odd and enchanted. Hi, guys, and welcome back to Texas History for Kids. This is episode number 95, and I'm your host, Michelle Gallegos. Before you listen, don't forget to grab the resources that accompany this episode by clicking on the Resources tab in the show notes. Well, I hope you're ready for the next 4 episodes. They're guaranteed to put a little scare in ya. This is the first episode of the Scary Story series, Texas History for Kids style.
It's October, and that means Halloween is around the corner. From haunted insane asylums to burial grounds, don't miss an episode.
Today's artifact is a simple key with iron teeth, worn smooth from years of turning locks. But this key once hung from a guard's belt inside a Texas insane asylum. Each click of the lock didn't just seal a door. Inside are sealed stories of real people whose lives ended in mystery or were lived in terror. It's time for Zoe's big question.
What exactly is an insane asylum?
Well, an insane asylum was what people in the 1800s and the early 1900s called a hospital for people with mental illnesses or disorders. The word asylum actually means a place of refuge or safety. At the time, doctors didn't fully understand mental health, so the treatments were experimental and conditions were often poor. Later, these places were renamed state hospitals, believing this to be a more humane name.
What kind of things happen in an insane asylum to make it haunted?
History, pain, and the way people were treated. Today we're talking about 3 insane asylums, or lunatic asylums, as they've been referred to in the past. We're going to find out who was sent to these places and why, what treatments made life inside so frightening, and the ghostly legends that linger to this very day. It was 1861, the same year cannon fire thundered over Fort Sumter and the Civil War began. While soldiers marched east, another kind of war was beginning here in Texas, a quiet one, fought behind locked doors. That same year, Texas opened its first insane asylum, the Texas State Lunatic Asylum, later known as the Austin State Hospital. It looked like a fortress of limestone on the city's edge, promising safety for those society no longer understood. But this was an age when medicine itself was an experiment. Doctors worked by trial and error, hoping their treatments would work, fearing that they might not, and guessing the entire time. There were no antibiotics, no real understanding of mental illness, and certainly no modern treatments. Each new idea was a test, and the patients were the experiments.
Who was sent to an insane asylum?
Men, women, and children. Some suffered intellectual disabilities, including mental retardation and other illnesses like epilepsy or alcoholism. Some were depressed, they were sad, or some had traumatic events. Women could be sent there for something called hysteria, a word used for nearly every behavior that defied expectations of women in those days. Among one of these patients was John Neely Bryan, the founder of Dallas, Texas. When his mind began to fade and alcohol got the better of him, he was brought there. More about him later. So to calm the mind, doctors turned to ice baths. Patients were lowered into freezing water until their bodies stopped trembling, believing the shock would cool their wild emotions. Iron restraints, chains, and straps held restless hands and frightened hearts still. Then came the stranger cures. One of the most shocking treatments ever tried inside a Texas asylum, literally, was called electroshock therapy. Doctors placed metal pads on the patient's head and sent an electric jolt straight through the brain. The idea that a quick burst of lightning could calm a stormy mind. Patients would stiffen, they would convulse, and then they would fall still. Sometimes when they awoke, their memories were completely gone, like someone had erased whole pages from their entire life. Doctors called it progress, but for those who lived through it, it felt like a flash of pain followed by a lifetime of shadows. Another terrible cure during the early years of the insane asylums includes insulin comas that dropped patients into hours of darkness before doctors rushed in with sugar to revive them. And later, lobotomies. Simple tools slipped behind the eye to sever thought itself. Some patients emerged quiet, too quiet. Others never came back at all. People say the halls still echo with footsteps at night. Some believe it's the spirits of those early patients still searching for a cure that would never come, walking around still shackled or restrained. Before we go further, let's talk about the treatments these patients went through and why doctors believed they were necessary. Doctors believed in something called an ice bath. Cold water hydrotherapy would cool intentions and emotions, calm agitation, and quiet manic episodes. Patients might be immersed for long periods wrapped in cold, wet sheets, or put under really chilling cold showers to reduce quote-unquote overexcited nerves. Today we know these practices were cruel and could be traumatic. Restraints were another thing that doctors believed would be helpful. Oftentimes, they were iron cuffs, chains, or leather straps used to keep patients tied to beds or chairs. They said it was for safety, but it trapped people in more than one way. Early asylums were overcrowded and understaffed. Restraints and seclusion rooms were used to control behavior and prevent injury during violent episodes. But they were also a sign that the hospitals lacked safer options. Austin's own history reflects the era's problems with crowding and limited standards. Patients endured some strange cures during this time period as well. Across the U.S., hospitals, including Texas facilities that followed national trends, patients experienced hydrotherapy, prolonged seclusion, and later electroconvulsive therapy in early forms. In the mid-20th century, some institutions used lobotomies, which is one of the strangest cures ever tried inside Texas asylums. Imagine a doctor holding a tool that looked like an ice pick near your eye. Quick side note here. Because I know you're a curious bunch, did you know you can keep learning after this podcast ends? Yep, head on over to TX History for Kids, where you'll find matching activities, vocabulary lists, and even coloring sheets for each episode. And if you're not sure these reading passages and activities are for you, just click on the Send My Freebie link in the show notes and I'll send you the Texas Flag episode absolutely free. Now back to the show. Instead of fixing broken bones, this tool was used to reach the brain. With a quick strike behind the eye socket, doctors cut the wires that create a person's thoughts and emotions. believing it would quiet their troubled minds. Sometimes patients stayed calm, almost too calm, like their spark was gone and they lost their personality. Others were left with blank stares, unable to remember who they once were. What was once meant as a cure often left only the shell of a person's former self. Another quote-unquote treatment tried inside Texas asylums was called insulin coma therapy. We talked about this earlier. Every day, patients were given such huge doses of insulin that their bodies collapsed into a coma, completely unconscious. The theory was that shocking the brain in this way could reset mental illness, especially schizophrenia. Now, doctors reported temporary improvements, which gave them hope at this time. Hours later, doctors would rush in with sugar to help bring them back, hoping the shock would reset their mind. Some never woke up. Others suffered brain damage, seizures, or lasting health problems that they didn't have before. And by the 1950s, thankfully, these insulin comas were actually abandoned. So, despite its early intentions, some patients became experiments. The hospital also kept its own cemetery with thousands of graves for those who died within its walls. When the cemetery was supposedly moved, officials claimed every body was reburied. Yet many locals whisper that not all were found, that bones still rest beneath the grounds of the original asylum.
Oh, now I see why a place like this could be haunted.
Absolutely, when a place holds generations of suffering that was supposed to help them, lines can be blurred and the inhumane treatments they endured up until their deaths inevitably could trap them in the afterlife. Originally, patients who died at the Austin State Hospital were buried on the hospital grounds if their families never came to claim their bodies. Sometimes even the hospital staff found their final resting place there as well. Officials claim that all bodies from the original site were dug up and reburied in the new cemetery. But like I said, many believe human remains still lie beneath those hospital grounds. In the late 1800s, families would often enjoy picnics on the asylum lawns, never realizing that just 6 feet below them were hundreds of forgotten souls. Among those first burials was John Neely Bryan, the founder of Dallas, Texas, who had struggled with alcohol and was declared mentally ill. He was admitted to the asylum in February of 1877 and died that September. Though many say his body was returned to Dallas, a headstone dedicated to him stands at the Austin State Hospital Cemetery, and rumors persist that part of his remains still stay beneath the hospital itself, forever tied to the institution he could never leave. Between the 1950s and the 1970s, the Austin State Hospital removed around 200 brains from dead patients. Some say under questionable circumstances. Doctors at the Austin State Hospital believe the key to the mind's mysteries lay inside the skull. So they began saving the brains of patients who had died, preserving them in jars filled with cloudy fluid. They said it was for science, to understand what made a mind break, to find clues in the folds and the scars of human thought itself. But as years passed, the labels faded, records vanished, and the collection took on a life of its own. 200 brains, each one filled with memories and dreams stored in silence. When they were discovered decades later, half of them were gone. No one knows where they went or if they were ever meant to be found. In 1986, the hospital auctioned off a collection of brains, attracting bids from major universities like Harvard and Yale. But administrators chose to keep the specimens right here in Texas, sending them to the University of Texas at Austin. There, the brains were preserved in those glass jars sat forgotten in the basement of Professor Tim Shallard's lab until journalist Adam Voorhees rediscovered them in 2011. He found that many brains were oddly shaped, belonging to patients with conditions such as schizophrenia. One brain was completely smooth without any folds. The most chilling discovery? Half of the collection, about 100 brains, had mysteriously vanished. Though Voorhees never found them, he did learn that one of those brains belonged to Charles Whitman, who was the UT Tower sniper that killed 16 people in 1966.
So, what kind of ghostly sightings have people seen?
People report cold spots in the older parts of the psychic wards, cries of pain and terror, fear at night, and footsteps walking along the empty corridors. Of all the spirits said to haunt the grounds, none is more famous than the Lady in White. Her ghostly figure has been spotted wandering the grounds for decades. She is often described as a sad woman, probably a former patient who died on the tragic treatments we spoke about earlier. Her story is passed down through hospital staff. The Austin State Hospital ghosts may come and go, but the Lady in White seems to be a constant. Witnesses describe seeing her floating through the halls while feeling an intense coldness. Those who have crossed her path say they feel an overwhelming sense of sadness, as if she's searching for something or someone she may have lost long ago. Now, whether or not ghosts are real, the history in these insane asylums is. 20 years later, to ease Austin's crowding, the state built a new asylum in Terrell, Texas. Enter Miss Ella Jane Voss, a young widow who had remarried in 1908. That same year, she was admitted to Terrell with melancholia. Back then, the word melancholia could seal a woman's fate. Doctors said it meant deep sadness, but the truth was even darker. A woman might find herself being sent away for crying too long after the loss of her child, or even for speaking her mind. And the wildest reason? Some women were sent away for reading too many books. That's right. Women who read too much could be considered insane. Husbands could sign a single paper declaring his wife insane, and thus the doors of the asylum would close behind her, never to reopen. Inside, her tears would become so-called symptoms. Her silence would become madness, and her sadness was treated like a disease that needed to be cured. But the real sickness was the world that refused to listen. For Miss Ella Jane Voss, well, her records show that she would be admitted to the state hospital, then released for a small period of time, then she would be returned again. This went back and forth for decades. It was as if Terrell itself wouldn't let her go. And she wasn't alone. Newspaper clippings from 1893 tell the story of Miss Mary Newberry, who was declared insane, sent to Terrell, only later to be judged sane again. Errors like these fueled fear for the place. Imagine spending time in an insane asylum when you are not insane or crazy. Even though this was 20 years later, the treatments were still as before. Hydrotherapy was routine, early electroshock cracked through the dark, lobotomies were done constantly, and patients were confined to locked wards and strapped in their beds. Staff tell of doors slamming shut when no one's around, of whispers in the long red barrack halls when nobody's around. some say Ella still lingers, waiting for a release that would never come. Now we're going to move on to our third and final insane asylum, the San Antonio State Hospital, which was built as the Southwestern Insane Asylum in the 1800s. San Antonio's hospital spread across hundreds of acres. It had farms, workshops, and wards with hallways that stretched like endless tunnels. There's one story from the San Antonio State Hospital that isn't about ghosts, but about a man who was actually forgotten while he was still alive. His name? Well, he's simply known as Jules. For generations, his family spoke of him only in whispers, or not at all. That is until his great-great-grandson Jason went digging through dusty records when he found the truth. Jules had been sent to the asylum long ago, and he never came home. His name was erased from memory, like he had never existed. Jason said, "It's like finding a ghost, one that shared my last name." Erased from history because simply he had lived behind the walls of the San Antonio State Hospital. Now, like the others, San Antonio used ice baths, work therapy, secluding people for days on end in darkness without anybody around, no communication. Later came the more invasive biological methods, but each cure left its mark. The San Antonio State Hospital is a place where history and horror go hand in hand. It was also here that a man named Patrick O'Brien earned his nickname. In 1979, this 300-pound recluse shocked the city of San Antonio when authorities charged Patrick O'Brien with the brutal murders of his parents with a steak knife and an ice pick. According to the Paris News, both were stabbed multiple times so violently that the scene was described as though they had been blasted with a shotgun. After this gruesome crime left even police speechless, O'Brien then told officers a wild tale that he was the son of Adolf Hitler and the father of the Dallas Cowboy cheerleaders. Spoiler alert, he was neither. Now, Patrick had been in and out of the San Antonio State Hospital 8 times between 1966 and 1975 before he killed his parents, never staying longer than 90 days at a time. Now, doctors tried to help him, but the system kept releasing him back into the world. When tragedy finally struck in 1979, many wondered if the hospital had kept him longer, would his parents still be alive? Officials later described O'Brien as a brilliant, almost finished with a PhD in mathematics, but deeply disturbed. A local doctor even said, "He is a very, very sick man. He should never have been out on the streets." The hospital's history didn't end there. Former employees whisper about strange happenings, lights flickering, doors slamming, and voices echoing through the empty halls. One worker said, "I've been here for 8 years. This is a scary place." Another person added, "There's death around the corner. We hear and we see things." Locals say the ghosts of forgotten patients still wander the grounds, spirits who never checked out. With a past filled with experiments and heartbreak and tragedy, it would almost be stranger if this place weren't haunted. Even today, new stories surface. Online reviews talk of loved ones who vanish for days without contact. Staff are accused of cruelty, and eerie feelings that linger long after visitors leave the property. Now, maybe it's just the power of suggestion, or maybe somewhere behind those locked doors, the echoes of history still stir.
It's quiz time! What year did Texas open its first insane asylum, the Austin State Hospital? A. 1776, B. 1861, C. 1912. Question 2. What strange cure involved plunging patients into freezing cold water? A. Hydrotherapy, B. Brain surgery, C. Ice cream therapy.
It was hydrotherapy. Doctors thought cold water could calm a racing mind. The iron key we began with was meant to open doors. Instead, it locked away people. Secrets and pain. Today, the locks are newer, the treatments are modern, but the shadows of the past remain. That's all for today's episode. Stay tuned for next week for the second episode of the Scary Story series. Thank you for listening to Texas History for Kids. Hit that subscribe button and follow the show. More importantly, share it with others who might find it interesting too. If you have any questions or stories you'd like us to uncover, feel free to send an email at michelle@txhistory4kids. And don't forget, the best Texas stories live just beyond the lessons in your classrooms, waiting for you to explore.
Stay curious.